My name is Ariel Ruiz, and I'm actually a student here at SSA. I'm a first year. I'm actually an undocumented student here at SSA. So it is a wonderful privilege for me to actually get to introduce some of the folks that will be talking about the policy here, especially with a very pertinent need for my personal situation, but also for many others here in the university and across Chicago. It's great for you guys to come out here. I feel like I cannot stress this enough. Here at SSA, we always remember that the place that you're starting here really began with the vision of the settlement house movement, talking about how immigration was such a key perspective for social work. And I feel like over time, we sort of have forgotten about that. So it's great to actually have you guys here with such a great and a very impressive panel for you tonight. So once again, thank you for being here. And I'll begin to introduce, basically beginning from my most right with Oscar, the panelists for today. So first, we have Oscar Chacon. Oscar Chacon is an executive director of the National Alliance of Latin American and Caribbean Communities, or NALAC, which is a network of community organizations led by Latin American and Caribbean immigrants. Prior to joining NALAC, Oscar was a director of Enlaces America, a project of Chicago-based Heartland Alliance for Human Needs and Human Rights. Oscar is now widely recognized as an expert on Latino immigrant issues in the United States, and he's also a great friend of mine. Then we have Wade Henderson. Wade Henderson is the president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, which is the nation's premier civil and human rights organization. Mr. Henderson is also the Joseph L. Rao Jr. Professor of Public Interest Law at David A. Clark School of Law in the University of the District of Columbia. He was previously the Washington Bureau Director of NAACP, the Associate Director of the National Office at ACLU, and the Executive Director of the Council on Legal Education Opportunity. Mr. Henderson is a graduate of Howard University and Rutgers University School of Law. He's also a member of the bar in the District of Columbia and the United States Supreme Court. After that, we have Tom, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, Tom Baunoff, and he is the president of both the SEIU Local 1 and SEIU Illinois State Council, representing over 50,000 property service workers throughout the central United States. He also serves as the president of the Property Service Section in the Union Network International, which includes more than 50 building service unions in the 40 countries. And he is one of the founders of the Chicago Jobs with Justice. He is the founding member of the United Power, and he has served on boards of the Chicago Anti-Defamation League, Citizen Action Illinois, and Illinois Coalition for Better Healthcare. Fourth, I believe we have Silvia Puente, and Silvia Puente is the executive director of Latino Policy Forum and is the convener of the Illinois Latino Agenda. From 2001 to 2011, or 2008, she served as the director of the Center for Metropolitan Chicago Initiatives for the University of Notre Dame's Institute of Latino Studies. While at the institute, she was driving force behind the convening a regional dialogue on the suburbanization of Latino community. She previously served as the director of New Community Initiatives for the Resurrection Project, director of Research, Public Policy, and Advocacy for the Latino Institute, and in a variety of positions with the state of Illinois. Puente received her MA from Harris School of Public Policy, which is just a couple of blocks from here, at the university, and she holds a BA in Economics from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Also, and we're very thankful to have the Honorable Representative Jan Schukowski, and especially for me, actually live in her district, which is even much more of an honor.
That's why she's here, right?
She was elected to represent the Illinois 9th Congressional District in 1998 and is the leading member of the House Democrat leadership, serving as Chief Deputy Whip and member of the Steering and Policy Committee. Prior to her election to Congress, Schakowsky represented the 18th district in Illinois, in the Illinois General Assembly for 8 years. She served as a Democratic floor leader and as secretary of the Conference of Women Legislatures. For 20 years before her election to the Illinois State House, she fought for the public interest and rights of Illinois citizens as program director of Illinois Public Action from 1976 to 1985. And she's a graduate from the University of Illinois. She graduated from the University of Illinois in 1965 with a BS in elementary education. And lastly, we have Helen Kribel, and she's a founder and president of the Vernon Kribel Foundation, a private foundation dedicated to public policy and America's founding principles. She's a noted leader in the national debate on immigration and the author of Two Paths to Safety, a private sector initiative to break illegal immigration deadlock. She has become a highly sought-after speaker on the issue, including forums in both houses of Congress, the prestigious Heritage Lecture, the Conservative Political Action Conference, the Institute of Americas, and testimony before the U.S. Senate. She holds a BA from Harvard Radcliffe and an MA from the University of Pennsylvania. Without further ado, I will pass it over to Steve to begin the panel. Thank you for being here again.
Ariel, thank you so much. Ariel, thank you so much for that, and thanks to all of you for being here. We're delighted to have you with us for what probably, I would have to say, might be the single best timed Institute of Politics event we've had yet. Bill drops this week. We've got a committee hearing on Friday, another on Monday in the Senate, and we have all of these folks here to talk about it and the broader issues around solutions to our immigration system in the United States. I'm going to go down just to open this up and get reaction from each of you in whatever fashion you choose to weigh in on the bill that was introduced in the Senate this week by the so-called Gang of Eight. Oscar, why don't you start us off? What's your sense I know you've only up to 842 pages, but with 2 pages left to go, what do you think?
Actually, I'm up for 20. And still reading. Well, first of all, I think it is great. I mean, that we finally have a bill, in the Senate. Somebody like Wade knows this even better than I do. I mean, we've been here before. Super excited, with a bill in the Senate. And yet never got to the finish line.
2007?
So 2007. And actually the last time I saw Wade, it was in 2009, and he was super excited about the chances of passing immigration reform in 2009, and here we are. So I think it is great that we have the Senate bill. I think that it's important to understand that the bill that was filed, it's far from the finish line. And I think it's important in the course of the conversation we will probably address, what is actually going for it, so to speak, but also be honest about what's, up against it. And I think it's important to have both assessments clear. Now, the bill itself, I happen to be executive director for something called the National Alliance of Latin American and Caribbean Communities. Just let me remind you, people of Latin American and Caribbean origin make up the largest chunk of the foreign-born population in the U.S., about 55% of the foreign-born population. Now, if you look at the undocumented population, it's about 85% of the undocumented population who happen to be people mostly from Mexico, but from other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. So we definitely have a vested interest, in having a bill become law, because clearly, and somebody brought it up, in the previous conversation, about 1,400 people per day are being deported right now, and about 36,000 people are being kept in detention centers on a nightly basis. So we need to stop that. And I think that's very important for us. Now, I've been already speaking quite a few times on the bill since Wednesday morning. I happen to be in Colorado speaking on immigration issues this past week. And I tell people, what is going to be hard for someone like me or anybody working for Latinos in the U.S. is going to be managing expectations. Mm-hmm. Because beginning November the 6th, of last year, a narrative came into place on the very night of election night. A narrative that essentially paints Latinos as the most precious political commodity in the country. We've been told so many times since November the 6th that there is no future without Latinos in the U.S. And that as a matter of fact, it is because of such a precious commodity that Republicans have come to play ball. That's the narrative that we've been hearing from November the 6th to the present. But we have to be aware there is a different narrative, a very different narrative, that actually came into place in the late 1980s, that actually led to the passage of the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act in 1996, which I believe we all here would agree is the most terrible change in immigration policy from the perspective of immigrant communities, and especially Latinos, Mexicanos. And I think that we need to be honest. The bill that was filed Wednesday, first thing in the morning, It's a bill that is primarily permeated by the narrative that paints immigrants, mostly Mexicans, as a threat to society, as opposed to the narrative that began on November the 6th.
Why do you say threat narrative?
Well, I mean, somebody else alluded to this also in the previous panel. Let's face it, we are accused of being lawbreakers. We are accused of stealing jobs from Americans. We are accused of being lazy. We are accused of being drug traffickers. And you can go on and on and on and on.
And
that narrative.
all the investment is on this, all the border enforcement is on the southern border.
Exactly. If you look, as a matter of fact,
in the proposed bill, we should point out, right?
In the proposed bill, we're going to be investing up to $5 billion on the southern border, when we know that about half of unauthorized immigrants in the United States are not from Mexico or Latin America. That half of unauthorized immigrants in the United States came on a plane. They didn't cross the southern border.
Correct. So anyway, just to
mean,
finish. No, don't worry about it. I mean,
I want all of you to jump
I
in.
appreciate any help. I think it is important to just keep in mind, I mean, I would say 75% of the bill would fall in what I would call, the bad and the ugly. I mean, there is good in the bill too. Let's face it. I was honestly surprised, gladly surprised. I mean, at a lot of what I read in the bill so far. But, for example, what Sylvie's pointing out, continuing in the path we have already been for the last 20 or so years in terms of immigration enforcement, border buildup, it's an outright waste of your money and my money. And I think it is also important to say it. I mean, if we were in Mexico or in El Salvador, we would call this outright bribery. Passing on billions of dollars to industries that are making tons of money at the expense of causing suffering in human beings.
I want to get others in on this really quickly. But why do you say absolute waste? Because, there are lots of people saying, hey, security, regardless of to what ends, are really important. You can look at, immigration factors into the debate that over Boston this week. They were legal residents.
But that's
here,
not happening along the southern border, Steve.
Yeah.
And I think that's the fact that we refuse. In this bill, we have inherently continued to criminalize the Latino population by putting all this border enforcement on the southern border. And it's a waste of money. One of the most remarkable statistics I heard is that a dozen years ago, every Border Patrol agent used to apprehend 200 unauthorized people a day. Is that it? A month. Wait, what?
A month.
A year. Is it a year?
No, you're right. It's a year.
I'm losing my time frames, but the ratio is now 20. Yeah. So in whatever it was 200 a month, and now it's 20 a month, right? And I might not have my time frame correct, but the ratio is. It's just putting good money. I mean, we're just putting more bad money after bad in terms of the amount of border enforcement, and it's not paying off. It's a waste of money.
I should point out what's in this proposed legislation: $6.5 billion over 10 years for increased border security. Right. It would include extending fencing along the southwest border, electronics systems for checking at airports and seaports, et cetera, and the big focus being along that southwest border, as you said.
Right.
Wade Henderson, though. Yeah. Oscar just said 75% is classified as the bad and the ugly. What's your number look like?
Well, I have a slightly different take, but I'm inclined, Sylvia, to have you go ahead and state your position, because I want you to give me time without interruption. Okay? So,
Sorry.
Okay. No, I'm just trying to make it real. Look,
I'll say go ahead.
All right. Look, I think.
Wait, just to clarify, we were invited to chime in.
Yeah,
so.
I'm just trying to, carve out some space. Look, guys, I have a slightly different take. I think there are three sets of principles that sort of govern how I look at the bill, and I'll try to be specific. First of all, I think that immigration reform is one of the defining civil and human rights issues of the 21st century. Okay? I believe that strongly. I believe that when you look at the defining issues of our time, you will see immigration reform right there with health care reform as a right. And so the new health care bill sort of addresses that. And you will look at the effort to bring equality to the LGBT community. Those are three of the big civil and human rights issues of the first decade. A bill that provides a pathway to citizenship, some are calling it a roadmap to citizenship, if it were real, would be, in my view, a significant gain that helps mute or minimize the consequences of the bill. And there are many consequences that are negative. And Oscar, I agree with you in that respect. The second principle is that issues of race and class permeate every aspect of American policy. So, I mean, that's just the reality of it.
I agree.
So don't be shocked when there is a racial dimension to legislation that purports to do something positive that we want, because that is, of course, characteristic of every major policy response in this country. If we want it better, we have to make it better. And then I think the third principle is a political principle that tends to govern Washington. And with all due respect to Jan Schakowsky, whom I love, she probably is a slightly different animal, but I look at it this way. Republicans fall in line. Republicans fall in line. Democrats fall in love. And progressives multiply through division. Okay? So you're going to see a response to these issues that reflect those principles. Now, Oscar is correct and Sylvia is correct. The focus of the bill has elements which would seem to paint Mexicans in particular as a source of problem. All of the border enforcement activity in the bill is concentrated on the southern border. None of it addresses the northern border, which is also a point of entry, and very little of it addresses visa overstays, which constitute about 40% of the undocumented population. That's very true. Secondly, we are moving away from family reunification, which was the basis of the 1965 Immigration Act. We are now moving into a more skills-oriented immigration program, which is more consistent with European economies and is a byproduct of the capitalism that we pursue. And I understand people get pissed when companies like Microsoft or Google and others say they need more STEM employees, more H-1Bs, and we can argue whether that's true. But I do know that Vancouver, Canada, was one of the beneficiaries of our failure to provide adequate support for the expanding industries that relied on H-1Bs in that area. Vancouver was built because we couldn't get STEM immigrants from H-1Bs into the country fast enough to deal with others. So that's a reality. And I guess the last point is this. One of our founders of the Leadership Conference was A. Philip Randolph, who was the founder of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. He was the first African-American labor leader. He organized the March on Washington. He was one of those leaders, and his view was this. You know, there are no free seats, guys, at the table of life. You get what you can take. You keep what you can hold. You can't take it, and you sure can't hold it unless you're organized. The left is not organized on these issues, and we are not dealing with Americans where they are. So I think this bill reflects many of the biases that we see in other policies, and if we want to change it, we're going to have to organize and change it. But overall, I'm optimistic, Steve, because I think that for the first time in recent memory, we are seeing issues of morality and values coincide with economic interests and political interests that suggest that the time is right to pass a comprehensive bill. I consider that a positive development.
I want to ask Tom for his forgiveness on this, because I want to bring the reaction down to my end of the table here with Helen Kriebel and Representative Schakowsky. And Helen, I want you to pick up on this, because you approach this from an economic point of view, and you also approach this from a slightly different side of the aisle. So what's your reaction to what we're seeing coming out of this Gang of Eight?
I dislike the bill, and I am a small business owner who can't get labor. And I look at this and I say, okay, we've got to have, do you want bureaucrats in Washington with no understanding of the business community to decide a quota of the number of workers in all these different categories for us, quotas that have no relationship to the workplace? Or would you really like to have an employer need determining the number of visas that can be issued and letting private sector implement the process of these visas? One can be done in 48 hours, and we have a plan that will show you how to do that. And one has not been able to be accomplished in 4 months just for seasonal workers. So you need to think about that economic need. Now, I look then at this bill, and I say, first of all, we know it's 800 plus pages, 44. And it's sort of like Obamacare Junior. It's really hard to come to. I brought this to remind you of what a good document looks like. This is a declaration and the Constitution of the United States, and it's 7 pages long. just to remind you. Okay, this bill is going to create this new government bureaucracy, the Immigration and Labor Market Research Bureau, headed by a political appointee who is going to determine the number of workers needed in a range of businesses in the future. Anybody who knows anything about business knows that this is going to be really impossible. And this is on top of bureaus that already determine for businesses how many guest workers they can have or foreign workers and what they have to pay them. So you're adding on top of that these things. And, of course, they also issue permits. That's the fifth bureau involved in getting a foreign worker. And the huge number of new government employees in this on-top bureau and the cost to taxpayers with a decrease in efficiency is something I think you should consider. Now, there's new W visas, low-skill workers. Who decides who's low skill and who isn't? Who is wanted and who isn't? The government, clearly. And this includes, among other people, the whole hotel industry, the whole restaurant industry, the whole construction industry, and it's supposed to be capped at maximum fulfillment at 200,000 visas. It's insane, right, from your first look at it, because government doesn't know what the market needs. Markets know. So that's a big problem for me. How about the merit visa? What government do you like who is going to determine who has merit? The government's determining who has merit and who doesn't. That is a very scary situation. And I think we should avoid that at all costs. And it really is the temporary legal status that it talks about still requires that you go through a security check and you have a job. That's great for a work permit. If it was in the private sector, it could be done in 48 hours. In this, we're talking years and years and years before they can go through 11 million people who are already here and determine their criminal status and determine whether they have jobs and whose family. Folks, this is not going to work.
Let me. I want to pick up on several things, including your approach to this. But let me get Representative Schakowsky in.
Just make one final
sentence on this. One final point.
Okay. So what I want to say is, it's tweaking what we already have that we all know won't work. And so if it won't work, isn't the definition of insanity doing something over and over again the same and thinking it's going to change?
So Representative Schakowsky, in terms of just the idea that this doesn't necessarily stand for change in the way that Helen Kriebel talks about, or that this is just a larger government approach to something that needs to be more refined. What's your sense of what the Senate is?
First of all, I want to say to Helen that if you added up all the pages of immigration law that institutionalize today discrimination against immigrants, I assure you it would exceed the number of pages in this Senate legislation. And so I just want to be very careful that we don't snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. All of us can spend our time talking about the things that are lacking in this legislation, but let's remember that aside from people who, and that's a big aside, that come after December 2011, that annual deportations, which add up to 400,000, will be stopped. That immigrants who arrive, millions and millions of people, will become legal. They'll be called registered provision immigrants. and they'll be able to work lawfully while they wait for lawful permanent residency and citizenship. So we can go through all the things that we wish were better, but I think that what we're seeing right now is essentially the high watermark, perhaps. I mean, I'm not suggesting that any of us who are advocates should stop working to make this bill better. But I think that, and I just want to say, Luis Gutierrez, who deserves amazing credit for his leadership, is part of the Gang of 8 in the House of Representatives, and frankly, they're going to come up with a proposal that is probably not as good, given the majority in the House of Representatives of John Boehner. So I think that we need to look at the positive things that this bill has achieved, and is it a bribe that we're going to spend most of the money that's in the bill on more border security? Yeah, probably. That's probably the cost of getting some Republicans to vote for this legislation and getting enough. But I think it's time to look at the incredible achievement getting to this point. And I would attribute that to passion and politics and public opinion that has changed significantly when it comes to immigrants. Let me just say a couple things about that, because I just want to give a huge shout out to the Dreamers to start with, the amazing courage, the courage of young people who stood up and subjected themselves to possible deportation and detention in this country. The amazing immigrant rights groups here in Illinois, ICIRR, which has done a fabulous job in organizing. And I'd like an opportunity after you go through to just talk about some of the politics involved here. And it's not just Hispanics. Asians actually voted in larger percentages, 73% for Barack Obama over Mitt Romney, and that is in contrast to 31% of Asians who voted Democratic in 1992. Not that long ago, really. Well, over 2 decades, an amazing change. So we are seeing this, and I want to. You brought up Obamacare, which I say with pride. In the passage of Obamacare, I'm a single-payer person. I think that would be the best way to go. But I worked very diligently to help to pass the best bill we could, that 30 million people in the United States are going to have health care. Is it perfect? No. But we have to take our opportunities when they present themselves. And we could be in a position that we were in 2007 when we were very, very close. And both Democrats and Republicans stepped back from actually making something happen. And I think we'd be making a huge mistake if we did the same right now.
We'll come back and talk more about the complicated politics of that. But
Okay.
Tom Balanoff, we've heard a lot about what business wants, what labor wants, what each is willing to accept. What's your reaction to what we're talking
Let me
about?
first of all say I agree with Representative Szynkowski. I do think that we have victory here, and we better not let it slip away. I will tell Oscar, I wish I could say what percentage of the bill I like or I don't. I was stuck on the runway in D.C. for 5 hours. I said, good, I'll read the bill. And quite frankly, when I saw I was at page 3 of 880, I said, I think I'll read a novel I'm reading. I will say that first of all, we in SCIU, and I think the entire labor movement, were very pleased that President Obama made this a major part of his reelection. We were pleased that he won for a whole slew of reasons. And quite frankly, if it helped move this immigration debate and get us to where we're at, we're pleased with that. There are parts of the bill that we don't like, actually, and we think there's probably 2 parts that are core to the compromise the Senate reached that we're not going to be able to change. And one of those is it takes 13 years to reach citizenship. We think that's ridiculous. That's way too long. The other is that it arbitrarily cuts off this at December 1st of 2011. You know, there's tens, probably maybe hundreds of thousands of people who are going to fall in that category, and that seems to make no sense to us. It should be effective when it does. But we think there are things there's other things that we are not wild about, but we actually think that they can be corrected. We think there's things in the bill that just won't work. The whole question, it's a very short application window. It's 12 months. At that rate, they'll have to do 40,000 they'll have to do 40,000 people in one excuse me, a day. That just doesn't work. They say they can extend it to 18 months. That's not going to be enough time. I mean, I think that's something that can definitely get worked out.
You're talking about the process to become a registered provisional immigrant.
That's
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
We also think
Puts you
there's,
on the path to
there's another provision in there in terms of the excessive employment requirement, and we actually think this doesn't reflect what the heck's going on in this country. You know, it requires people to regular employment for 10 years. I mean, this wipes out a lot of people. This wipes out, home givers. It wipes out all kinds of things, and it doesn't reflect, unfortunately, what has been happening in our economy, that as we add jobs, we're moving more and more to contingent work, part-time work, minimum wage work. It doesn't face the realities, and I think that we better connect what's going on with our economy with what's going on in this bill. We're concerned that this eliminates the total elimination of diversity visas. That has a tremendous impact on immigrants from Africa, and we actually think that we weren't exactly sure why that was part of the bill. Those are things that we think can get corrected. Same-sex couples, the bill makes no improvements on this question of same-sex couples being recognized, and we think that's totally out of sync where we're heading. Thank God where we're heading in this country. And also the question of government benefits, particularly ACA. There will be a gap here of years and years, thousands, millions.
That's a health care bill.
Yes, millions and millions of workers who are not going to be able to access ACA. We don't think that really, that's out of sync with the public policies in the direction.
And just to underscore that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Representative Schakowsky, the issue there is while you are registered provisional immigrant status, you do not have access to federal benefits during that period of time.
My understanding is you can go into the exchange, but you won't get any kind of supplemental help.
You have to pay full price.
Right.
You have to pay full price.
All right. So there's a lot more here to pick apart in what sounded like just a ringing endorsement, Tom, as you went through all the criticism.
I didn't necessarily want to make it a ringing endorsement.
All right.
But listen, we do think this was a step forward. We do think there's some core things we're not going to be able to change, we're going to have to live with. But we do think also in the process of this bill going back and forth, a lot of things that can be corrected, and it can make a tremendously positive impact.
All right, on that note, let me get back to Sylvia. So Sylvia, where do you come at all of this?
So I think it's really remarkable to think of where we were literally about a year today, where we were engulfed in these Republican presidential debates, and we actually had to have one of the Republican presidential candidates drop out because of his support of the DREAM Act in Texas. The Republican Party was vicious in their attack of him, and vicious in the whole view of the immigration issue to one of our presidential candidates saying, let people self-deport. The fact that we have now gotten to this point a year later, I have no illusions that it's really because we want to fix our broken immigration system. It's because the Republican Party is worried about their future and being elected to the higher office for the next several generations. And that is why we're here. Now, that's really hard for me to stomach because I'm a policy person. I want good public policy, right? And the fact that we are saying that we're going to have to give up on the $4 billion of wasted money in the border because that's the price that we're going to have to pay for getting to the point of what we want and my organization wants in terms of comprehensive immigration reform. I'm pragmatic. Right? I am a pragmatic idealist. So if that is the price that we're going to have to pay, I'd rather have that $4 billion go into solving our unemployment issues in this nation, improving our education systems in our nation. And when we're looking at the limited resources that are available given the overall economic crisis, how can we justify $4 billion wasted dollars when we know we have all these other issues to confront and to address? So Having said that, though, then I have to confess that I'm not quite as pessimistic as Oscar, and that when I read the bill, I was braced for what level of compromises are we going to have to make, and I was pleasantly surprised at what I saw around the provisions for family reunification, the provisions for the DREAM Act students, so that even a young man went into the airport in Mexico City and walked into the bookstore, and he figured out my Spanish wasn't all that and addressed me in English, and he had been deported from Utah and had finished high school in Utah. There would be provisions for someone like him to be able to come back into the United States. So I think that there's potentially, those are some really good things. My concern there is if that's our starting point, how much are we going to have to compromise, especially what's coming out of the House? And as I've already indicated, and I won't belabor, not at all happy with what we're putting in terms of the enforcement issues and how that continues to criminalize the Latino community in this nation and make us look like that we are the bad guys in all of this. I think that our politicians, it is this duality of this narrative, and that the Republicans want our vote and know that they need to have it, and that's why we're sitting at the table to have this conversation. At the same time, they're just saying, we really need to put all this money into the southern border, and we need to keep you on your toes to make sure we continue to criminalize the Latino community in the United States.
Let me go back to Representative Schakowsky just on the politics of this for a second. You talked about what happened in 2007. You mentioned the House process. Where do you see this going politically? What's happening inside the House right now, and how do these things resolve themselves towards something that might actually get to a vote?
Well, a really good vote in the Senate is going to make a difference in the House. But to follow up on Sylvia's point, what was a year ago a wedge issue, it seemed, or the Republicans thought, for Democrats, has now become a wedge issue for Republicans. That is a very dramatic change. They cannot afford to be cast as anti-immigrant. They have finally seen the writing on the wall. And, while, okay, so it may be disappointing, you want to see it just for all the right reasons and the good reasons. In fact, politicians, thank goodness, can count. And they have made the count, and they see how badly they have done. And it's only going to get worse. By 2018, the majority of American children will be minorities, and so the future for them is really dim. They get it. That is important. So I think that in the House of Representatives, we have here's the challenge. In districts where we have a large number of immigrants, we know how to organize. There's been fantastic organizing. So what do we do in those districts where that isn't an issue? What we've also done, what you've also done, is put together what we call the BBB coalition: Bibles, badges, and business. And the evangelicals and the Catholic Church, and you can do all the arguing you want to about why is it that they're so enthusiastic about immigration reform, and truly self-interest is involved there as well. I don't see that as necessarily an evil thing. They want to be able, their churches, they want market share. They want people to come into their churches. On the badges side, law enforcement is with us to a large extent on this. There's an occasional sheriff here and there who isn't so, and we do have businesses that are very interested, and as long as we can keep the labor business coalition together, I think we have a very good chance of getting a good bill, and perhaps with all your help, a better bill. So the politics is definitely on our side, and public opinion has changed. A Wall Street Journal NBC poll just April 6th to 8th, 54% of Americans believe that immigration strengthens the United States. 54% of Americans. 64% believe there should be a pathway to citizenship, goes up to 76% when the question specifies that the pathway must include a fine background check, back taxes and other steps. Now, there's still a party difference, but I think that our coalition of that includes non-immigrants is going to be a big help in those districts.
I want to talk more about the business and labor piece. There's so much to pick up on here, but Helen Kriebel, under the provision, there are 2 new guest worker programs, one for agriculture, one for low-wage workers. There's a cap at 20,000 of those kinds of visas for a year in that program. The business community wanted it to be much, much higher. That's part of where you come at this. You have a proposal around temporary workers that would actually create a separate card, the red card solution, as you've called it. Help me understand why you think what this approach would be, and why you think it's something that should be part of the conversation.
Thank you. I think that there are a couple things that we need to really think about, and one is picking special deals for special groups. I really don't like that, and I don't care who the groups are. I think we need to fix it for everybody on a fair playing field. So, the dreamers, the agriculture, the this, the that, you can fix it all, but fix it fairly and give everybody a chance. We don't believe all men are created equal in America.
So you don't want to see caps, is what you're saying, in certain
No,
classifications here.
and I want to incentivize people to do the right thing, economically in particular. So let's take 2 paths. Let's divide work permits, which should be extremely easy to get with legal work, right to work in the United States, and citizenship, which is a very serious matter and should take a long time. And remember, about 70% of the people who have come here on various visas want work. They love their countries. They want to go home. They don't want to be American citizens. So why should they have to go through an extensive program? Let's just let them get the visas. Now, in our thing, we have suggested that employment agencies licensed by the American government create databases. Now remember, employment agencies are masters at putting workers and jobs together. That's what they do, and they do it well, and they do it efficiently. So they create a database. Any employer who has a job that they need to fill will post that job, the qualifications, and the salaries, absolutely transparent to everybody. Foreign workers who would like to have those jobs, any jobs here in the U.S., post your qualifications, your salary needs, your skills. Let's post that. These agencies will make a match, fees on both sides. Worker comes in once a match is made, potential worker, it may be in his own country, he may be undocumented here. You come in, you go get photographed, fingerprinted, go through the national security database and the terrorist watch list. If you can pass that and you have a job, you get a secure card with a microchip in it that guarantees that if you present this card, you are the person who this card was authorized to. Job security check, go. You're legal in the United States. It takes 48 hours to do. 48 hours. And it's fees on both sides. There are no taxpayer dollars involved, no new bureaucrats. It is directly related, flexible, year after year. Maybe many in one category, maybe none. It's completely flexible. This is what I meant when I said the private sector knows how to do business. Get government out of it. Citizenship deserves government attention. That is a very different matter. Separate paths.
Let me let Tom Balanoff, and I also want to get Wade Henderson in on this, respond to this idea that why not create sort of 2 separate pathways and let the labor pool and the employer pool be one that's far more flexible.
Well, there is a separate pathway set up on the W visas. It's just limited, okay? Yeah. And I understand the great concern that it's limited, I think, to 20,000 now. As I understand, that can be expanded to 200,000. In terms of reaching the compromises I think we all needed to reach, that was something that had to happen. Now, I will tell you that this idea of just let business take care of things, I don't think is necessarily such a good idea on this issue or in issues in general. I mean, the market, in terms of labor markets, is taking us in a direction that is leading us to a low-wage economy. So I do think that the question of government regulation is important, okay? There was changes made on the W visas, which I think was a good compromise. I'm happy the fact that I understand now that those visas don't directly connect a worker to an employer necessarily, and I think that's good. I understand that those workers now will also have all rights that are provided to all workers, whether those be labor laws or other laws, and I think that's good.
Isn't there some kind of a prevailing wage provision also?
There is, as I understand. Again, I got to page 3 of the act last night, but I do, as I understand, does now attach prevailing wages so that these workers aren't exploited and, quite frankly, aren't undercutting the value of labor of U.S. workers.
I would like to just highlight that I think that the reason that we're in this mess to begin with is that because we haven't made adjustments to the fact that we're living in a 21st century global economy, and we have this mismatch between supply and the demand for labor. The reason we have 11 million unauthorized people in this country has more to do with the fact that they subsidize every salad that we eat, every housekeeper that we have, every landscaper that's out here taking care of the beautiful grass. And this bill makes at least an attempt to address the labor market provisions. I don't know that it does it to the degree that it needs to do it, but I think we really need to be framing this conversation not for necessarily the unauthorized person and what's going to happen to them, although I'm very concerned about that, but what is the broader labor market of the 21st century, and how do we reconcile that in a nation like the United States?
Well, let me also ask, Wade, the question about economic impact, job availability, low-income workers. One of the key questions that surfaced, and Oscar alluded to it as well in his opening remarks about the most precious political commodity in the United States being Latinos. What does all of that mean for African Americans?
Oh, guys. Look, this bill really is the rubric's cube of American politics, so that when you make adjustments in one area, it has impact on the total outcome of the bill. You can't really look at it in total isolation. Having said that, we are a pluralistic society that has actually turned diversity into a strength, unlike some parts of the world where diversity is now the source of conflict. There were 2 provisions in the bill that had particular interest for African Americans. Let me say, immigration is not a Latino issue, it's an American issue. And African Americans have a stake in the outcome of this bill. The polling data, and we've done polling data very recently by Celinda Lake and others, Lake pollsters, one of the best in the country, that says the African American support for legalization is probably higher than almost any other group, including within the Latino community as you start looking at some of the concerns that have been raised. So African Americans have underdog politics. We tend to support those who are in an oppressed state, and we identify with their concerns. The 2 issues that surfaced as the bill was read, however, pose a problem going forward. One of them is the elimination of diversity visas, because the issue of African immigrants from the diaspora is important to the African American community, both on substance, but also politically, because the treatment of these immigrants reflects the political status of the community to which they belong. And so when you have a bill that seems to gratuitously eliminate a provision through which the majority of African-descendant immigrants came, it raises profound questions about the bill and how it goes. The other provision, I have to say, Senator Dick Durbin played a very important role both in initiating and keeping in the bill. There's a provision that addresses the issue of racial profiling in the context of immigrant enforcement. This is an issue of great sensitivity to the African American community. Driving while black, guys, I need not remind you, started the discussion about racial profiling in the context of criminal law enforcement. When George W. Bush was still in the White House, both President Bush and Attorney General Ashcroft stated before Congress their commitment to end racial profiling as we know it. 9/11 jumped up. that obviously changed the dynamic, and it put issues of Muslims and South Asians and Arabs on the table in ways that had not been the case previously. It has taken us now about a decade to get back to the point where we have a provision that addresses profiling in all three contexts. 24 hours before the bill was in, that provision was taken out. But for Dick Durbin's urging to keep it in, and Schumer helped as well, it would not have been in the bill. You can imagine how African Americans would have looked at a bill that eliminated both diversity visas and racial profiling, and then tried to sell it to our community, because there is also a deep concern about the impact of expanding low-wage worker visas on the lowest elements of the economy here. It's not simply coded racially. Obviously, there are poor whites who are poorly educated who will be harmed by some of that economic competition. But Sylvia is correct on 2 points from my perspective. One, this does have to take into account the global economy. And two, look, we have to have pragmatic idealism. If we really do believe, as I do, that the prime directive in the immigration reform context is how do you bring 11 million undocumented immigrants into the protection of the law? How do you do that? And how do you do it in a way that enjoys the political support of the American people? And it requires us to develop a series of provisions that speak to those interests. When people say, well, what happened to the provisions that related to the LGBT community? Well, I remind you, the Catholic Church and the evangelical community wasn't too big on marriage equality. I'm just telling you. So it's not surprising that a flaw in the bill would not have included that. Now, it may come in as an amendment, and I think Congresswoman Schakowsky is correct. There will be some provisions that can be improved over time. But I think there are real challenges, and I think that we are faced as progressives, and I think the values that you hear expressed by the entire panel suggest that we have a unity about our overall goals for immigration reform. But from my standpoint, we are facing a fight against time. This is a bill that, if it is not approved in the Senate by the August recess, which is the end of July, we open ourselves up to a level of attack that will disintegrate the level of support that we have now. And that raises a profound question in my mind about how we move this thing forward. And that's why I raise this issue as a rubric.
And if I may add, Steve, just to set the record straight, I mean, the fact that people like me and many others, I mean, have actually a critical scrutiny tendency over whether this is good policy or bad policy doesn't mean that we're not pragmatic. Absolutely. Or that we're not realistic. You know, the bottom line is I have had low expectations from the beginning. Namely, if we can stop 1,100 people being deported a day, I'm in. You know, the rest of it has to do with what Wade very wisely said. It ultimately boils down to who in our society is organized to exercise power and who isn't. And, you know, when I say 75% of the bill is within the bad and the ugly, what I mean is that, you know, reading very honestly who's going to make money out of this piece of legislation. And I'm all for having it passed because I'm pragmatic. But let's face it, private prisons are going to make a ton of money. High-tech military industry is going to make a lot of money. High-tech industries are going to make a lot of money. Agricultural industries are going to make a lot of money. Services industries are going to make tons of money. And I therefore understand why the bill, from my point of view, because I don't defend those interests, I defend the people who are being deported on a daily basis. That's the people who are of concern to me. And from that perspective, I do not want to give up, you know, my right of being critical in scrutinizing whatever bill comes in, comes out. But I think it is important to remain pragmatic. Absolutely. Because ultimately what we want is to stop what is happening now. And frankly, I don't even believe that we have to wait until there is a bill passed in the Senate or the House or both to stop deportations. We could actually stop it now. From my point of view, it makes no sense.
Would you call on the president to change his policy?
Well, I think the president has the authority to do it. But see, here is what I find ironic about the bill. The bill actually suggests that if you have been deported, you will have a chance to come back. So why don't we start deportations now? It makes no sense to me.
All right, I want to take questions from all of you. So I know we have some microphones. Ronnie's over here with the microphone. We'll get some hands up. There's a lot to say. But I think Representative Schakowsky, you wanted to jump in.
No,
on
I just wanted to jump in on the timeline here and endorse what Wade has said, that even as we look at finally read all the paragraphs in the bill and have our criticisms, we cannot waste the time, too much time, to get it passed out of the Senate.
All right, there's more on that, but we have a question here in the back. Yes, sir.
My name is Francisco. I work also with Oscar very closely in a lot of immigration policy and rights. But one of the questions is, since these immigrants are citizens from other countries, what are other countries also doing, for their citizens here, or also to push for an actual comprehensive immigration reform?
Yeah, no, Oscar, I think you've looked at this, as I understand it, with El Salvador, for instance. I mean, how is this viewed from different countries?
Well, first of all, let me say from the politics side, nobody in Washington wants Mexican government or the Salvadorian government to say anything about this. And they know it. As a matter of fact, they have remained very quiet. Now, with that said, what my organization, for example, is doing is trying to bring attention to the governments of Mexico, Central American governments, Dominican Republic government, that they better get ready, because they're going to be inundated with demands for documentation that will be required for people to establish identity, to establish many other things. And I can tell you for sure, right now, they're not prepared. And they don't even have a plan, which is really worrisome. And so that's part of what we are trying to do.
Cross-border. It's not just can the government, as Tom was alluding to, process, what was it, the 4,000 a day number. It's actually, can the country of citizenship or origin actually process the paperwork as well?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Fascinating. Okay, let's take some other questions here. I'm going to move through here. Yes, sir, and then I'll come to you on Weisker.
Yes, as community organizers for the quality of life for Latinos with disabilities, there's a couple of concerns. One is the content of the bill in reference to those people that have injured themselves within the job and became disabled. What would be that status? And also, there is a bigger fear than just deportation, and that's medical deportations. People that are being deported straight from the hospitals. Would this bill now try to prevent that if someone becomes disabled while in the hospital, while working and then coming out, would they be in fear of being also deported or within the hospital, facing a medical deportation as well?
Wow. Let me try my hand at that. Look, if the bill requires a certain level of financial self-sufficiency in order to qualify for a legalization program. So you have to be able to demonstrate that you are not going to become a public charge in a way that would require you to be subsidized by various programs. Therefore, one may assume that people with disabilities, even when they are injured on the job, unless they can establish a valid work-related claim, I will have a problem. It's the truth. Now, the disability community is beginning to take a look at this issue because they are concerned that persons with disabilities not be adversely affected by a legalization program. The truth is, we're going to have to hustle and work for that. Some issues, however, don't have to be dealt with only in the context of an immigration bill. For example, Oscar mentioned the issue of private prisons. Hey, we are all united against the Corrections Corporation of America. There is, but let me say, guys, there is a 34,000 mandatory bed requirement that exists under current law. That Homeland Security is required to keep 34,000 beds fully occupied. And where did that number come from? It came from the private prisons who have moved to criminalize what had been essentially a civil problem. We are arguing now that you've got to revise the whole issue of mass detention, just as we are addressing the issue of mass incarceration. Okay, so you don't have to wait every issue does not have to be seen only through the lens of immigration reform. And what we're suggesting is that there has to be more organizing and more efforts that go beyond the narrow confines of the bill to address some of those underlying issues that we're concerned about. And one last point, and I know, Sylvia, I'm jumping in here. The only thing I can say, guys, is this. Unemployment among African Americans is twice the number of unemployment as a general matter. We've accepted that, meaning the country, as if that were the new normal. It's wrong. We should not be at 16% unemployment when the country is at 7% or 8%. There is concern about how the low-wage visas are going to impact the problems of the poorest among us. We are arguing that the displacement is relatively minimal because, and you have seen this in terms of immigration efforts when people like the governor of Georgia tried to conscript people who were in prison to go out and pick crops. They said, to hell with that. You're kidding. I'm not going to do it. And they didn't. You have workers who come in, obviously, and do that for a living. All I'm saying, guys, is that we are trying to approach these issues in a comprehensive way. We're trying to do it collaterally, but we're not going to do it in a way that poses a risk to the passage of this bill. This bill, as flawed as it is, gives us a once in a half 6-year, 10-year generational term to get a bill that legalizes 11 million undocumented immigrants. That, for me, is the prime directive. The deportations have to stop. But I'll tell you this, the last time a bill came up, 2007, it was attacked by the right, it was attacked by the left. By my estimation, we lost 2,400,000 immigrants who were deported between 2007 and now. And I understand President Obama has the power to stop deportations. He exercised his executive authority to suspend the deportation of the Dreamers. If he were to suspend the deportation of existing law, Republicans would walk away from that in droves and argue that it was Obama who killed the prospect of immigration reform, and to try to shift the weight once again on Democrats for undermining the bill, even though Republicans would like that outcome as well.
So
but
politically, a
for
change
reasons.
for the White House isn't going to happen on this.
The White House can't do it, guys.
Yes.
It
Let me
cannot.
get young man
Stephen,
here.
can I just add one element
Yeah,
about
please.
the question having to do with disability population? There is one positive aspect, at least in the bill as filed, and it recognizes the fact that populations who happen to be disabled, who happen to be immigrants, who happen not to have a status, are a special category that deserve legal representation. And that's a change. I mean, right now, there is simply no legal representation for anybody. So it places disabled communities in the U.S. in the same category as it places children and as it places women as especially vulnerable populations that deserve legal representation. Now, will it extend? We don't know.
Yes, the next question here.
Hi, thank you. As a Chinese student studying here on the F1 visa, the issue of immigration is deeply emotional and personal to me. And I would like to ask about 2 points in this current bill proposed by the Senate. First, on the issue of penalty to the current undocumented workers in this country, whether it's the 10-year wait period or the back taxes and everything. From what we heard from the previous panel, I think it's probably safe to argue that it's rather than the people failing to obey the rules, it's the rules that failed them in the first place. And is it fair to have these people shoulder the burden of the system that was fundamentally flawed in the first place by passing these new legislation? And the second issue is on border security. I think a lot of, especially the Republican side, have been arguing that securing the border is first and foremost in any form of dealing with the current undocumented workers. But that's what my middle school physics teacher taught us in terms of explaining conductivity. If you could walk through a door, you would not choose a window. And I was just, if we could have a safe and legal pathway for workers to come into this country, then they would not, most people would not be risking to cross the border in illegal means. So is there a flaw in understanding the causal relationship?
Let's let the panelists respond. Yeah, and let's let Helen Kriebel respond, because this is also an argument that a former member of Congress made that is actually, I think a mayor in Texas made, that essentially you could have better security if you, to your point, open the door. So.
If you could get a legal work permit in 48 hours by taking a job and going through a security check, having this card which can be swiped at the border, you have your door into the United States, and it's an incentive, not a government command. And then you would come through the gate if you're looking for work. But, you know, you have to have a security check and a job to get this provisional legal status. So let's get this done. Let's do it quickly. Now, many of you are dependent in your thinking on government. The American idea and the American dream is not government related from one end to another. We are private, responsible individuals capable of managing our own lives. So if you would be so good as to think about an alternative to the government smothering of small business, incentive, opportunity, and release our economy through something simple in private sector in terms of work permits, it could be a very viable, inexpensive alternative to all these government plans that we're talking about tweaking a little bit.
Is there some let me take a few other questions here. But Representative Schakowsky, I don't know if you want to weigh in on the first part of the question, just about this idea that from a broader perspective, we're looking at a complicated process that could actually have lots of externalities, essentially, lots of impacts that might not make life better for those who are trying to come to this country.
Well, obviously, it's going to be a balance, but I have to emphasize this is going to be the beginning of a process. This is going to be the start of a process. And we're going to have to make improvements at every step of the way. The first being when the bill actually comes up in hearings and there's going to be amendments added and changes made. And obviously we want to perfect it, just as we would like to do with the Affordable Care Act. And so let's identify what those problems are likely to be. If there's unintended consequences, let's identify them. And if we can get them changed, fine. But if we can't do it right now, then I think we still have to move forward on balance.
Let me swing to the far side of the room here. Yes. We'll take just a couple more questions.
Yeah, I guess we've been focusing a lot on the aspects of the bill that we would like to change, and I think that's really important. I also want to make sure we don't forget that we also need to worry about the parts of the bill that we need to defend. So I'm wondering what aspects of the bill do you think are most vulnerable to attack, particularly now that it's, once it goes to the House. I mean, it's still in the Senate, so we still have to worry about that. But also in the House especially, what parts of the bill do we really, really need to fight for to make sure that they do not get taken out or changed in a negative way?
Who wants to take that? Sylvia, do you want to start there?
Well, I think certainly the House isn't going to be as generous in relieving the backlog of family reunification, may not be as generous in terms of the pathway to citizenship, and that it may either be longer or may not get there, right? So I think those are the trade-offs I think that we're going to have to weigh.
Wade?
Yeah, I agree with Sylvia. I think that the pathway to citizenship and the barriers that are built into the bill, and you would expect that there would be some, are probably going to be strengthened in the wrong way. They will, the House will probably insist on a few additional changes that will move the bill further to the right and make it more difficult to have people actually legalize. One of the concerns we have, it's not just the time frame. The 13 years is obviously a long time. But we are concerned that there are built-in barriers that are around the due process issues. I mean, when Oscar mentioned the 1996 law, one of the changes in that law was that it eliminated discretion on the part of immigration judges to be able to make individualized decisions that make a difference. We're trying to reform that. I don't know if we can pull it off. It's obviously a problem if we can't, because what you are likely to see are some immigrants who would otherwise qualify for legal status who are going to be challenged. You know, the definition now of an aggravated felony under Immigration Act, you know, you have an ounce of weed and you will be subject to deportation. Now, I'm not trying to sanction the use of marijuana. I am saying that a relatively modest infringement of the law should not be a hurdle over which so many people won't come. So I think the issue of worker visas, which are going to be a serious problem, and I think the issue of pathway to citizenship is going to be a problem.
Let me talk about another barrier which we haven't touched on. And Oscar, I want you to
can I quickly just add, to what is worth defending?
Okay.
Because, I did say that there is good in the bill, don't get me wrong. I think that defending every mention of reversal of 1990 pieces of the law is very worthy defending. The grant program to support nonprofit organizations to assist in educating and enrolling people in whatever comes out is crucial to defend. The foundation for citizenship and integration that is created according to the language of the bill is absolutely worthy defending. The Office of New Americans that he proposes to create, the private and public partnerships is crucial to be defended. And lastly, just to emphasize, because I think it's crucial, the agreements between private sector and organized labor on temporary workers is absolutely crucial to defend, just to mention 6 aspects.
All right, let me ask one other thing, though, because this is another hurdle that's significant. We haven't touched on it yet. That the whole pathway to citizenship doesn't begin until, at least in the vision outline, so you get 5 years plus a 90% threshold of border security effectiveness at key checkpoints and key sectors of the country.
Well, those are the hidden elements. Sylvia, I'm sorry, you want to go first? Those are the hidden elements that are not ordinarily discussed, and that's what I'm talking about when I say barriers. I mean, this requirement that there be a 90% standard that one can use to measure whether border enforcement has been achieved is a very difficult, arguably an impossible threshold to meet. One of the things that apparently has gotten us to this point is Janet Napolitano has said that, we have done a pretty good job in enforcing the law, much to her credit, and she's being dogged for that. She's being dogged for that. Well, the bill builds in additional measurements. You're going to have 5 years to have the so-called E-Verify system in place, in which employers are able to verify electronically the authorization to work on behalf of the undocumented. That's going to be hard to achieve. So it's those kinds of provisions that are just under the radar, not being discussed now, that are going to have a real problem. So I agree, Sylvia, with you and others who have said, look, putting 5 million at the southern border seems to be a waste. It is, except it buys a level of political support and comfort on the part of politicians who would ordinarily not be with us. And when they're going home to justify what they have done, they've got to be able to say that. So when John McCain and Jeff Flake, the 2 senators from Arizona, go home and tell their constituents that they've signed on to a bill, and they take heat, and they are, and they can come out and say, well, look, this is what we've done to try to respond to your concerns. It helps to lessen, it helps to minimize the concern, and that's important. So, I understand the trade-offs are not attractive, but they are necessary.
All right, we've got time for one last question here. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Susanna Sandoval, and I'm a hybrid of a person. My family owns the only print Spanish language TV guide in the country, and we help run the National Association of Hispanic Publications. I'm a longtime advocate of immigration reform and have worked with a lot of people in this room, as many people, to try to get a solution passed for immigration reform. Several years ago, I formulated part of a Chicana delegation that went to the UN and took to the UN's floor for the Permanent Forum of the Americas a resolution that included the fact that the United States and Mexico never paid the folks that were in the first temporary worker, the braceros program, and we actually took some braceros with us at that time. So for those of us who don't have a short-term cultural memory, and we are not that stuck in the current American identity crisis that we're currently find ourselves in, we're slightly offended. And as a descendant of a migrant farm worker, I find it really interesting that, obviously I elected our president. I worked very hard with many advocates around the country in order to get him elected. I think he has an extremely difficult job and has done the best that he can. But I also don't take it off his plate, because just as quickly as he did the Lilly Bed letter, or whatever the act was, that the correct name of the act was, that passed on the very first day that he got into office, he can also blink an eye and sign another executive order. And as a parent, I find it really interesting that he's able to sleep at night, in knowing that many children now have part of their cultural legacy and experience now in America, where it's embarrassing to travel around the country and around the world in order to justify how we've created a culture of fear instead of a culture of acceptance. So it's something for a lot of us to really think about in this room. I'm not blaming anybody. Obviously, we know it's a situation. Yeah. So the question that I pose for the panel discussants this afternoon is, in light of everything that we're working on, and obviously we've got a lot of brilliant minds in this room alone, why is it that we haven't really looked at a formula that includes, obviously there's 12 million people or 12 million plus people that are on somebody's radar, and those that don't exist yet. If you put a program into place, it doesn't mean anybody's going to stop coming to the United States of America, because we've done an excellent job of perpetuating the myth of the American dream. So,
yeah, what's your question?
The question is, how will we move forward working together in light of the politics that it takes? I mean, I've gone to the Hill both in Springfield and in DC, and knowing how deals get cut in and out of the room. How do we actually maintain our integrity and our character and have a cultural memory where we leave a legacy into place? Okay. What does that take, and how do we use our educational systems to do that?
Let's take that question, and thank you for your point. This idea of how do we actually, I mean, we talked about this being a messy process, right? Mm-hmm. All of you have sort of expressed your reservations with various aspects of this bill from different points of view. So what's your response to the question that was posed here? Sylvia, do you want to weigh in first?
Well, part of, I think, what we need, it is going to be messy and it's not going to be perfect. And I think part of what we need to do is, for me, is where are we starting in terms of the line to begin to compromise, right? And I think the line for me, my organization has said, we'll never have comprehensive immigration reform, because one of the tenets of comprehensive immigration reform is that we have a secure border. And you know what? We're at net migration on the border, zero migration now on the border between the U.S. and Mexico. So from my point of view, we already have a secure border. So we need to keep saying that and saying that and saying that, so that we can move the line at which we begin to compromise, I think, in terms of this moving forward. And I think what we need is just more people to be in the, I mean, it's going to be a fine line to walk, but we have to hold consistent to our integrity and our values in terms of everything that you were just expressing.
And then I'll fill in with the rest.
I just want to say, I think this is a great moment of opportunity, that people should feel optimistic, that we can make progress, we can make it in a short period of time as we move forward. We continue to organize, we continue to advocate, but that we understand this is a moment that we can take advantage of.
Helen Kriebel, what's at stake here from your point of view in this debate? What's at issue here?
Well, I think it's the future of America is at stake in this issue. But I think that we have on the table a government proposal. And I think we should put on the table the American proposal of the private sector to do this quickly, efficiently. Let's get everybody who's here undocumented, documented. Let's get anybody who wants to come here to work. If we have jobs available, let's quickly give them the opportunity to have that job and be in the United States legally. Let's look at an alternate plan, a good one, a private sector one, one that, so we can see the government on one side and our American dreams and American freedom and opportunity of talented individuals on the other side to come to a compromise, rather than the compromise being all based on what's already on the table from the Gang of Eight.
All right, Oscar, what's at stake here?
Well, from my point of view, Wade actually hit it right in the head at the beginning. It boils down to truly challenging all of us deeply to redefine what does it mean to get organized, to exercise power in a democracy. The reason why we organized to bring Republicans on board, to support largely what they proposed, instead of organizing to truly craft the immigration reform that would be truly beneficial from a human right point of view for immigrant communities and the country, is because we're not that organized. And I think it is crucial that we challenge ourselves in as far as any notion that we have had so far about how to organize in a way that results in actually changing the power equation. Do you think that the income and wealth inequality that is today reality would be there if most of us in society were really organized? I doubt it.
All right, Tom Balanoff, what's at stake?
I think...
your point of view for labor?
Yeah, labor's point of view, my personal point of view is this is an important moment. We need to take advantage of it. I do think there's no perfect bill. But I think this effort will lead in the right direction. I agree 100% with Oscar. The more we get organized, the more we can start to move towards what I would consider fair things. Things are not necessarily fair. Things are what you have the power to achieve. And the more people get organized and the more we get people in motion, we're going to have even better bills.
All right.
We should seize this opportunity.
Wade, let me give you the last word here.
Thanks,
This
Steve.
moment.
Wow. I agree completely with those who have said this moment is a unique moment in time, and so we shouldn't lose it. But I also remind all of us, you know, Americans, and really we're not that different from others around the world. We are ahistoric, guys. We don't often think about our own history in terms of how it has impacted where we are today. And this issue of race and cultural bias that's inherent in the policy process means that social change and the kind of change that we have seen occur in the 20th century does not move in a straight line. There are fits and starts that help to determine where we are. You know, I thought Susan gave a remarkable presentation about the history and the context of this moment. I told her there were just a couple of data points that I would mention which sharpen this. In the 1950s, when the Bracero program ended, there was something called Operation Wetback, where the U.S. government deported over 1 million so-called Mexican nationals, and it included U.S. citizens who were born here and were so-called deported back to Mexico because they were thought to be Mexicans, okay? The Japanese detention during World War II didn't just happen because the Japanese posed a threat. The Italians posed a threat. The Germans posed a threat. They were not deported in the same way. Change occurs slowly, and you don't have to be satisfied with it, and thank God young people have been the engines of change. So whether it was in the 60s, in the civil rights movement of that era, or the 21st century where the dreamers are pushing the issue today, young people make a difference. But I will close with this observation. Guys, I grew up, I was born in Washington, D.C., nation's capital. I grew up when Washington, D.C. was governed under a system of apartheid that was as nasty as anything South Africa ever thought to produce. I didn't dig it. In fact, I hated it. I chafed under that system. I have lived long enough to see that system end and change to be a part of the change that I wanted to see come. Now, am I satisfied? Oh, hell no. But it's a lot better than it was when I lived under segregation. I'm telling you, don't dismiss the benefits that come to those who do not have status in our society today. It's easy to say it's not good enough. But when you are trying to make it as an undocumented person in our society today, you know how tough it really is. And let's not lose this opportunity. Let's make sure that whatever we do, we build on this opportunity to get the kind of change we want to see occur. And I guess that's where I'd end.
And if I could, Steve, I just want to leave us all with this, that it is my sincere hope that the idealism of the advocate community on this issue does not get in the way of the practical, pragmatic realities of what we're going to need to accomplish this. And a reminder that all policy change is incremental. We're making a big step here forward, potentially. We won't get everything we want, but we have to get something in order to get the next step. And something is going to be better than nothing. And we have a very short window of time to band together, to organize, to have this happen by August, or the issue will be off the table for who knows how much longer.
Silvio Puente, Tom Balanoff, Wade Henderson, Oskar Chacon, Helen Kriebel, and Representative Jan Schakowsky, thank you all very much. We greatly appreciate it.